Yes. To make sure no one puts their stuff. I'm so down.
I was like, that was very sarcastic.
I was into everything. I don't listen just to one specific but yeah, I don't talk about just against
Too much.
Right. Hello, everyone. Time to begin. Before we start, I'd like to inform you that next week we will visit the community. It will be on the 15th of November. It's Wednesday. Instead of our seminar, we will have a visit to a community, which is a community of the Orthodox Church in America, originally the Russian Church. It's a similar lake. I'll post on the right face the announcement about it, how to get there, what is the address, and I suggest that we meet there at 2 p.m. There will be a free parking, and it takes some time to get there. Depending on traffic, maybe 40 minutes to 1 hour or so. Yeah. Sorry?
What if we have class before?
I didn't get it.
What if we have class before? So
Yeah. So instead of our class on Wednesday, we will visit the community. But on Monday we'll have our class. I mean, on next Wednesday we'll have our seminar. Then Monday we will have our lecture, and then on Wednesday next week, instead of our seminar, we will have a visit to the community.
No, she was saying more about if we have classes before this.
Oh yeah, I didn't get it. Yes, just let me know as usual. Yeah, and then we will
Have classes later.
if you have classes before, because it takes some time, and it will take more time than our usual seminar.
Will it last, will the actual visit be from 2 to 3:50, or would it be from 2 to 3 so that we get here by 3:50?
We will begin, I will ask you to be there already at 2 p.m.
Right.
So we will have approximately an hour, maybe less, of visit, and then you are free to go. Okay. Is it maybe it will be easier for you to have this visit at 3 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. No.
Yes.
For some of you, it will be easier. So who will want to have it at 2 p.m. Just raise your hands. Okay, and 3 p.m. Majority. Okay. So 3 p.m. then? Okay.
So what,
Yeah.
so if I can't go to 3 p.m. one, would it just count as an absence?
You just let me know, and I know it's a special
Okay.
special case, and
Okay.
if you're unable to do it, just let me know, and you will be excused. So 3 p.m. instead of 2 p.m., right?
Okay. Yeah.
I will make the notification as well. Okay. It means then that we will be there from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. and after that time you will be able to, you are free to go.
This is
Next week, not this week. Okay. And then on the on the 20th of November, which is the week of Thanksgiving, we'll have another visit to another community, to a Coptic community. And I suggest the same time from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. So instead of having a lecture on Monday before Thanksgiving, we'll have a visit to a community, and on Wednesday we will not have any classes. So you will be able to go home on Thanksgiving. Okay? So on the week of Thanksgiving we'll have only one class. On Monday, off campus, visiting the community from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. I will post an announcement on the right space. I just want to discuss it before I have it. Is it okay for you? Yeah?
Is there an assignment that goes with the visits?
No. Just enjoy your visit. Yeah.
I don't know if the Monday time is like, can we vote? Can we do it the hour before on Monday from 2 to 3?
Well, actually,
Or
it's a
is
bit
that-
more difficult because I've already arranged this with the host. So that is the only time slot that the host has.
Okay.
From 3 to 5 p.m. Essentially, we'll have our visit 3 to 4. Maybe we'll stay with 4 if you want.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah.
Where is it?
Yes, it's Robertson Boulevard.
How far is that?
I will tell you. You mean the Coptic Center, right? On the 20th of November. Or the church that will go next week. Both. Okay. So the OC, the Russian church at Silver Lake, it takes approximately from here 45 minutes on car.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's not very close. And to Roberts to the Coptic Center. Just one sec. Just one sec. Yeah, so to the Coptic Center, it takes 27 minutes, 30 minutes.
Okay.
So it's closer. Okay. Any other question? No. Okay, then we continue with our lecture. Today we will be discussing primacy. It's also a chapter in the book, The Scaffolds of the Church. And what we will be talking about first will be the rationale of primacy as it is exercised in different Christian traditions. Primacy has to do directly with the issue of leadership. Primacy is about leadership. It is exercised in the churches, but it is also applicable to wider contexts. Outside the church, outside any religious tradition, and then hopefully you will have maybe some better ideas about primacy after our today's lecture. So first we'll do the theory, some ideas about primacy, and in the second half of the class we will explore some histories of primacy, how primacy was exercised in the Christian church, how it led to the divisions within the church, because primacy is primarily to be blamed for the divisions within Christianity, and we'll explore those divisions and how primacy played its role in them. Well, speaking about primacy, first it is related to the idea of sovereignty, the idea that we discussed last time. Sovereignty within the church, which is very similar to the political models of sovereignty as they developed in the political science, and often the churches adopted models of sovereignty from politics. Primacy is something which is almost opposite to sovereignty. Primacy is about limitations of sovereignty. If someone, a person, or a church, or an institution imposes itself as exercising primacy, it implies automatically that the subjects on which this primacy is imposed get their sovereignty reduced. It makes those subjects less independent, more dependent on the institution which exercises primacy. As a result, there were always internal tensions within the church between the sovereignty of churches, of local churches, and the primacy. In the Western church, these tensions, they continued throughout the first half of the first millennium, Christian millennium, when independent parts of the Western Christianity, like in France, for instance, involved, or in Britain, or in Northern Africa with the center in Carthage, they struggled with Rome about what measure of primacy should Rome exercise upon them, because the price of the acceptance of primacy of Rome would be losing sovereignty, independence of those churches. And eventually they yielded, they gave up their sovereignty for the sake of accepting primacy of the Church of Rome. It was a painful process, not always smooth. It implied many tensions, as I mentioned, and eventually the Western Church was unified under the Church of Rome, and the primacy of the Church of Rome was imposed until it was challenged during the Reformation. So the tensions regarding primacy versus sovereignty of local churches were subsumed during the Middle Ages and re-emerged during the Reformation. And the churches of the Reformation, their struggle was largely about restoration of their sovereignty. At least that was the political aspect of the Reformation. The Reformation certainly had a political aspect. In the East, it was a sort of permanent struggle, and it continues. The balance between sovereignty and primacy was never found, was never figured out. The balance between sovereignty and primacy is very much dynamic in the East still. And this lack of balance, these tensions between sovereignty and primacy, they produce constantly problems within the eastern part of Christianity. Incoherence between the Western model, between the Western balance of between sovereignty and primacy, and the Eastern model balance of balancing between sovereignty and primacy, also doesn't help the dialogue between the two branches of the church. So that the perception of primacy in the East is different from the perception of primacy in the West. And we can say, it could sound too ambitious, but I think it is still true, that if we find a common formula of primacy in the East and in the West, we could eventually achieve a reconciliation of the divided Christianity. Because that is the most important issue, which is really, really important. Other things matter less in the dialogue. This issue is important because it affects, power structures immediately in both East and West. So, two models of primacy, or two models of relationship between primacy and sovereignty in the East and in the West, into different models, Eastern and Western, cause the two churches, the two parts of the Christianity, of the divided Christianity, not to find a common platform so far in their dialogue. Okay? Is it clear? Does it make sense to you? So in order to restore the unity, if we have this purpose of restoration of unity between the two parts of the churches, of the one single Christianity, the Eastern and the Western part, we need to think well about the nature of primacy. What is primacy? About the rationale of primacy, and about the historical patterns and precedents of primacy. Let us begin with with stating that primacy, speaking about the nature of primacy, primacy is just a case of the hierarchical thinking and hierarchical structures in the church. It's just a pinnacle of the thinking of the hierarchy. If you cannot, it means, in other words, that you cannot solve the problem of primacy without the problem of hierarchy. Because if you solve the problem of primacy, then the problem of hierarchy remains, and hierarchy still underpins primacy. Therefore, the problem of primacy should be tackled together with the problem of hierarchy in the church. And the question regarding the hierarchy and therefore of primacy, the basic question, remains whether hierarchy is pertinent to the nature of the church, or it is a structure which was built during the historical journey of the church. Whether hierarchy is something given from God, or it is an invention of people for their own convenience. If we answer this question, then we can answer the question whether primacy is something given from God, or it is just a matter of convention. It's just a human device. The Western and the Eastern churches, they essentially have two different answers to this question. From the perspective of the Catholic Church, and I mean primarily speaking about the Western Church, I primarily mean the Catholic Church, because the Protestant churches, they have a different answer to this question. So from the perspective of the Catholic Church, both primacy and hierarchy are innate to the nature of the church. They are an intrinsic part of the nature. They are the church per se. In the Catholic theology, this idea is expressed through the a Latin phrase "jus divinum," the divine right of the church hierarchs to be hierarchs. It's interesting that this idea of hierarchy as a divine construct, as a divine device, was articulated first in the East. It was articulated in the frame of the what we call now Christian Neoplatonism, a philosophical system that underpinned Christian theology, and this synthesis of the Neoplatonic philosophy and Christian theology happened in the East, more particularly in Syria. This synthesis was accomplished by an author who lived in the 6th century in Syria. We do not know his name. We only know his pseudonym. His name was, he called himself Dionysius the Areopagite. Figure who is mentioned in the New Testament, in Paul's epistles, as a disciple of Paul from Athens, probably a lawyer or a member of ecclesia, of the parliament of Athens in the time of Paul, who converted to Christianity. So that unknown author that we are speaking about, who lived in Syria, took his name, the name of Dionysius, and identified himself with that Dionysius who lived 5 centuries before him. And until Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, everyone was sure that that was exactly the same person. Dionysius the Areopagite was the one who wrote all those amazing texts which influenced the church tremendously. And only relatively late we realized that the person who wrote under the name Dionysius was a different person. He lived much later than the 1st century, and he was profoundly influenced by Neoplatonic philosophy, especially by a philosopher who was pagan, who was polytheist, whose name was Proclus. Proclus was a religious person. He was not like most modern philosophers. He believed in gods, not in the one God, but in many gods. And he tried to explain the existence of many gods by his philosophical means. And essentially what he did, he structured gods into hierarchies, into the pyramids of hierarchy. Gods for him dwell on different floors of the of the celestial hierarchy. And for him, gods were real. He just believed like any ancient Greek in many gods. And his philosophical input was exactly to structure their being into a hierarchy. Hence is the word. The word hierarchy means the sacred principle, the sacred beginning, the principle of the sacrality of the structure that embraces, that puts gods on different levels. Okay? So Dionysius in the 6th century in Syria took this principle and applied it to the Christian theology. He could not believe, of course, in many gods. He believed in one God. But he described the entire structure of being, including angels and different ranks of angels, in hierarchical terms. He explained the divine hierarchy, the existence of angels, unbodily beings created by God, through the hierarchical structure. He argued that God sends His grace to the first ranks of angels, and then they pass this grace to lower ranks of angels. And eventually this grace comes to human beings. And then the same hierarchy is replicated among humans. So that in the church and in the the hierarchy between people, between strata within society, between orders in the church, just reflects the hierarchy which is established by God in the heaven. Remember this Platonic philosophy that whatever we see in this world is just a shadow of what is above. So that was the idea, that the hierarchy that we have in the church and in the society is just a shadow of the divine hierarchy. That's how the idea of hierarchy was established as a divine institution. That no one could doubt this idea in the period of Middle Ages, for instance. Because the idea of Cesar Dionysius was so much influential. He was translated into Western languages. He became an extremely popular theologian throughout the Middle Ages. And his popularity is explained by the idea that, by the fact that he essentially explained the existent stratification within the contemporary society in the Western Europe by theology, by theological means. He argued that this hierarchy that we see when the princes are on the top, when there are nobility, then craftsmen, then peasants, then serfs, this hierarchy of the society is something established by God himself. It's not a human invention. Of course, Dionysius did not tell this himself. He didn't apply this to the society, but other theologians, he did this. He explicated, he projected this idea of Cesar Dionysius to society and made a perception of the society so strong in the West up to the modern ages, when up to modernity, and only modernity doubted this strict divine character of the stratified societies. Okay? Does it make sense to you? Now I think you can better explain why people for so many centuries lived with the idea that this structure of the society, strictly hierarchical, vertical structure of the society that existed for centuries, was so strong. And actually it took a long time and much effort to deconstruct this structure, to introduce new, more egalitarian structures when we believe that everyone is equal nowadays, right? So this is a completely new idea, which took a long time and much effort to replace the idea of the hierarchical structure of the society. So, coming back to our churches. The idea of the hierarchy was invented in the East, and it became nevertheless more popular and more widely spread in the West, and created the modern ecclesial structures. Actually, the ecclesial structures are they are still based on those antique medieval ideas. When modern society does not build anymore on those ideas, the church still preserves those ideas and still builds its hierarchies on those ideas. And in the Catholic Church particularly, this translates into the idea of the role of the Bishop of Rome as something which is pertinent to the nature of the church, as something which is a divine institution. Okay? So the Catholic Church still believes this, believes in this firmly. The Protestant churches in the 16th century and later on, they essentially dramatically, radically revised this idea of hierarchy, both in the church and in the society. Therefore, the Reformation essentially had this momentum of emancipation, first for the church and then for the society, leading essentially to a society which was more equal, more egalitarian, okay, by deconstructing the ancient idea of hierarchy of both the church and of the society. Okay? Does it make sense to you? And in the East, in the Christian East, in most cases, the perception of primacy in the church was also as if it is not something which is pertinent to the nature of the church, but it is something which the church has agreed upon. Something which is a matter of convention, something which is a matter of negotiations between the subjects, between churches. And as I said, we still argue about, the Eastern and the Western churches, they still argue with each other how to interpret hierarchy and how to interpret primacy as the pinnacle, as the probably most difficult and most obvious case of hierarchy. Okay? So we are here on the scheme. So there are two interpretations of primacy. One is that considers primacy as a part of the nature of the church, as pertinent to the church, as growing from the very beginning of the church, as a divine institution. And another perception which sees the primacy as just a convenience, an agreement. Both attitudes, they don't reject hierarchy or primacy as such. They accept them, but they give a different, I would say completely different interpretation to primacy. For the former interpretation, primacy is a divine institution, is something which is sacred per se. For the second interpretation, primacy is a human device. It is invented by human beings for let's say, for the historical convenience of the church, and can be revised therefore. The Eastern attitude to primacy is a bit more complicated than just that it is a matter of convenience. Because on the universal level, the Eastern churches indeed agree that primacy is not a divine institution, that primacy is just a matter of convenience, that the churches should accept and may reject primacy of another church. From the Eastern perspective, what happened during the Great Schism between the East and the West? First, in the first millennium, the churches agreed to accept the primacy of the Church of Rome. But then, at the turn of the millennium, they agreed that the Church of Rome should be stripped of this primacy. And they agreed that the Church of Rome not anymore the first among the churches. So they live with the idea that primacy is just a matter of the decision by the churches. This is on the universal level. On other levels of the church being, so we're talking about this level, universal level of the primacy. On other levels of the church, on the local, on the level of a community, and on the regional level, on the level of a diocese, primacy is a bit different. Well, the Eastern churches believe that primacy is almost a divine institution on those two levels, on the local and on the regional level. That it is also a divine institution and important for the church. And in this, there is an inconsistency about the Eastern point of view about primacy. You see, the inconsistency is that here on the universal level of the church, primacy is not divine from the Eastern perspective. On the regional and on the local levels, however, it is almost divine. It is believed to be a sacred institution. For the Western Church, primacy is divine primarily on this universal level. And its nature can be negotiated on the level of the diocese and of the community. I remember I once participated in a dialogue, in the official dialogue between the Catholic and the Orthodox churches. It was in Vienna. And we had exactly this discussion. And in the discussion, the majority of the Orthodox participants, except one metropolitan, argued that primacy is not a divine institution on the universal level. The Catholic side of the dialogue, they insisted that primacy is divine on this level, but they didn't care what the Orthodox believed about the regional and about the local level. So for the Catholic Church, the most important level where primacy is regarded as a divine institution is the universal level. It's about the role of the Bishop of Rome, essentially, of the Pope. So the Pope is the divine institution, and all other bishops, well, whatever you want, you can believe about other levels, about bishops, about priests in the parish. The most important thing is that the Pope is a divine person, a person whose office is divine. Okay? Yes, please.
So on the local, the Western primacy is not divine?
It can be both. It doesn't matter. There is no consensus about this. It's not important from the perspective of the Western theology, so you can hold both. But as a Catholic, we should believe that the office of the Pope is a divine institution. That is a teaching of the Catholic Church, and an essential part of this teaching, the teaching of the Catholic Church. But there is no particular teaching about whether primacy on the local level or regional level is divine or not. Okay. Right, I should probably explain a bit more about these three levels. The local level is a level of a community, of a parish. That is where people come together. It seems to be the least significant level of the church from the perspective of the hierarchical thinking, because in the hierarchical thinking, what is on the top is more important than what is at the bottom. Okay? And from this perspective, a community, a parish, is on the bottom, and therefore it is less important than other structures in the church, like a bishop or the Pope. However, and that is one of the ideas that we try to discuss repeatedly in our class, that probably this perception of community is not exactly correct, because community is the most important thing in the church. It is actually, if we imagine a hierarchical structure in the church, the community is on the top of this structure, not other offices, because the community is the nature of the church, and other offices are just the structures that serve community. Okay? Does it make sense to you? Would you agree or disagree with this? Actually, what I will ask you to do for the next seminar this week, Wednesday, is to explore the idea of primacy as you understand it, both in the church, in your own church if you want, or in a wider context. Because primacy is an important category, an important issue for any group, any social group, or for the society at large. So the thing is how you would explain primacy for this pyramidal hierarchical structure in a society, and how primacy should it be abolished, or if not, then how should it be exercised in a healthy way. Okay? So I believe that I made quite clear. You may disagree with this, but that was my point in both books that we study, that community is far more important than any other structure in the church. And when a hierarchy consumes or subsumes a community, then this hierarchy turns unhealthy, becomes unhealthy. It becomes abusive for the community, and therefore primacy becomes abusive as well. The primacy that does not serve community but demands from a community to be served instead is an unhealthy primacy. Okay. Well, you may disagree with this. It's okay. And the regional level, which I want to discuss a bit in more detail, is the level of the dioceses. The level of the dioceses, like the Diocese of Los Angeles, the Diocese of San Bernardino, the Diocese of Boston in the United States, or the Diocese of Mexico, and there are many local dioceses, the groups of parishes which are supervised by one single bishop. Those are dioceses. Dioceses exist not only in the Catholic Church but in most Christian traditions. Like in the Lutheran tradition, for instance, there is some sort of supervision also in less mainstream Protestant traditions as well. This regional level exists almost in every Christian tradition. In the Christian East, there is not much difference between a regional bishop and the primate, a person who is in charge of the independent autocephalous church, a patriarch. They are the same bishops. The same bishops, one bishop, the primate of a church, is simply endowed with a responsibility to supervise other bishops. But as bishops, they are the same. In the Catholic Church, it is different. In the Catholic Church, the Pope is a different sort of bishop. It is a superior bishop. It is a bishop which is who is above other bishops. And every other bishop acts on behalf and through the and with the power stemming from the Pope. In the Catholic Church, the Pope is the supreme source of bishops' authority, of any ecclesial authority. It is the Pope. And bishops, they are like reflectors of that authority. Just imagine the sun and the moon. The source is the sun, the source of light is the sun, and moon just reflects that light of the sun. That's exactly how bishops are related to the Pope in the Catholic Church. In the Eastern Church, the difference is that all bishops are like sons. They are sources of authority by their own. Okay? And there is no difference between the bishop and the patriarch. And that is another difference in perception of primacy or leadership in the Christian East and Christian West. Is it understandable? Well, you can judge it in your own way. I just explain you how the things are perceived in both traditions. Okay? Any other question regarding this? Any question? No. Okay, in other words, the leadership, the regional leadership, and the local leadership, because on the local level, pastors or priests, they are like, imagine moons reflecting light which has been reflected by another moon. A bishop receives his grace from the Pope in the Catholic Church, and then passes this grace to the priest. And the priest receives the reflection of the light which had been reflected by the bishop. So on the local level, leadership and ministry are exercised in the name of the bishop, who is on the middle level, in the middle this tier of a regional church. And this level, in its turn, receives everything from the universal center of the Catholic Church, from the Pope. Hence is, the importance of the Bishop of Rome. That's why it is so important for the Catholic Church to believe in the divine provenance of the papal office, of the papal authority. That everything else, every other office in the Catholic Church could be regarded as a human device somehow, but the Pope is a divine institution. This institution receives grace from God and then distributes that grace through other institutions. In the Christian East, again, it is different. In the Christian East, these levels are self-sufficient. They are bishops are the same, and on the local level, on the level of a community, priests are also ordained by bishops, and they serve in the name of the bishop. Even different words are used for ordination to priest and to bishop. We use the word ordination to describe the ordination of priests by a bishop, because bishops produces an ordains someone to act in his own name, while bishops are consecrated. They are sacrificed by other bishops in order to become one of them. Okay? Hence is the difference of two words. Therefore, in English it is incorrect to say ordination of bishops or consecration of priests. It is consecration of bishops and ordination of priests. Okay? That is the correct English. Okay? Any question? Okay. The last question that I wanted to discuss regarding the rationale of primacy of leadership and ministry in different church traditions is the theological underpinning of primacy. People who advocate for the divine nature of primacy in the church, they often refer to the models of the Trinity and of the Incarnation. That they say that bishops and the Pope, they act as, particularly the Pope in the Catholic Church, he acts as Vicarius Christi, as someone who reflects the position of Jesus Christ in the church. Jesus Christ in the church is the head of the church, and he's the most important person in the church, who is not visible. He is not with us physically, and physically he is represented by the Pope. Okay, so the position of the Pope in the church is just a reflection, a visualization of the presence of Jesus in the church. In the East, they say the same about the bishops. The bishops are the images of Jesus Christ, or images of God, the presence of God himself in the church, the visual presence, the visualization of Jesus' and God's presence in the church. They essentially say that there is a hierarchy in the being, which is in a sense correct, that God is on the top of the being, and Jesus Christ as God also is on the top, and everyone else just is below them. In the same sense, everyone in the church should be below the leaders of the church, because they are the image of God or Jesus Christ in the being. Another image which is employed sometimes to explain primacy as a form of leadership is the image within the Trinity. That within the Trinity, the Father is regarded as somehow superior to the Son and the Holy Spirit, because the Father is the cause of both of them. Remember, we were discussing the Trinitarian theology a bit. The Trinity, the Christians believe in the Trinity, one God who consists of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So, because the Father is the cause for the Son and the Holy Spirit, the Father is regarded as somehow superior in this pyramid. And this pyramid now then projects to the church, and sometimes those who exercise authority in the church present themselves as a reflection of the role of the Father in the Trinity. So that the idea of leadership in the church, based on hierarchical principle, this idea tries to substantiate itself on the theological models, on the model of the Trinity and on the model of on the role of Jesus Christ in the church. However, these models are in effect dangerous for the hierarchical thinking, for this perception of primacy. Because if we think about the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit are absolutely equal in the Trinity, which introduces a radical egalitarianism, equality, to the church as well. So the model of Trinity can even better substantiate the principle of equality in the church, better than the principle of hierarchy in the church. The same can be said about the role of Jesus. I think we were drawing the pyramid. The kind of medieval thinking based on hierarchy depicts the church and the world as such a triangle where Jesus Christ is on the top. Then he's represented by the Pope or by the patriarchs, and then lower ranks of people follow, and on the bottom, at the bottom are communities and lay people. And lay people. Okay. In this structure, Jesus Christ is on the top. He is the king. He is the one who is like in some, he is depicted like in some icons. Like such icons. He is the king. Or in the East, Jesus Christ is also depicted as Pantocrator, as the one who holds everything. Like here, it's one of the Byzantine mosaics. At the same time, the theology of the incarnation can give a different picture of Jesus. The one who is God, who became incarnated, who became man, and he became man in the lowest possible class of the society of that time. He was a son of carpenter in Judea, a very poor, insignificant, and unknown place of the world at that time. So God chose to be incarnated in the place which was absolutely poor, which was unknown, which was neglected, which was despised, in the hierarchy of modern world, it would be somewhere, I don't know, in Central African Republic or somewhere that people just don't know or ignore or just despise those places. Just imagine that God would incarnate it nowadays in some, obscure African republic. And that's what happened actually with the historical Jesus. Judea was such a place in the Roman world. And that means that God chose to be incarnated in the lowest possible setting, context, which places Jesus at the bottom of any hierarchy of the time. So that God essentially flipped over the pyramid that existed in that time and made it reversed. What was less important, what was least important was put to the top, and what was most important, like God Himself, who can be superior, who can be more superior, He placed Himself at the bottom of the pyramid at that time. This means that even the incarnation of God can serve as a different model, a model for non-hierarchical structure in the church, non-hierarchical leadership and ministry in the church. The ministry and leadership that are focused mostly on those who are at the bottom of any pyramid, social, ecclesial, and so forth. Okay? As the concept of Trinity and the concept of incarnation in the Middle Ages enhanced the hierarchical perception of what is the church, so the same Trinity and the same incarnation can enhance and even better so the non-hierarchical thinking, the thinking which puts an ordinary person and the community in the center of the church's ministry and practice. Okay? That is the conclusion of our discussions about the rationale about the nature of primacy and leadership in the church.